Hello, I'm Daniel Bosk, and I'm going to talk about distance-bounding privacy-preserving attribute-based credentials. Quite a long title, lots of words in there. We'll start discussing what distance bounding is, because this is perhaps not familiar to most people. So we'll do an overview. Then we'll talk about our contribution, which is distance bounding zero-knowledge proof of knowledge for discrete logarithms, and give an overview of what that means. Then we'll talk about our two constructions. So one based on mutual trust, which is a stepping stone to the full version, which supports PKI, public key infrastructure for key management. Then we'll finalize by talking about performance and conclusions. So the most straightforward scenario for distance bounding is the keyless entry to cars. There has been some news articles about incidents where the car manufacturer hasn't used distance bounding, and it ended less well. So in the scenario, we have two thieves, and one is close to the car, and the other one is close to the key, which is most likely in some house or building, whereas the car is on the outside. And these thieves, so the thief here close to the key, picks up some signals from the key, relays to the other thief, which relays the signals to the car, and the car replies, and the signal is relayed back to the key. And the key and car will probably run some challenge response protocol, and the car will believe that the key is in proximity of the car while it's not, and it will unlock, and the thieves can steal the car. And this has happened several times with some very fancy brands of cars. Another scenario is vehicle-to-vehicle communication, where cars communicate with each other to the cars that are in proximity. And the idea is that if something happens up here far ahead, these cars can send the message, which is relayed by all the cars back to the cars here, so they learn what happens up ahead, and thus can adapt their behavior, for instance, slowing down in case of an accident or things like that. Now, another scenario would be that, for instance, an ambulance could send a message to the cars, and then cars far ahead would know that there's an ambulance coming, and they can move and give way. Now, the car here receives such a message, and it's from close proximity, so it's probably from this car. So how would this car know that this car is an ambulance? If this car is equipped with the same type of equipment as the thieves had in the previous case, the colluder could be on the other side of town, close to the hospital, and relay the messages sent by the ambulances as they leave the hospital on an emergency. And then this car can just forward authentic ambulance messages to this car, and this car will believe there's an ambulance in proximity, I should give way, whereas that's false. So the problem here, this is related to authentication. So the solution is also related to authentication somehow. However, the problem is that the way we normally think about authentication, that is to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks, that doesn't solve this problem, because that authentication means that no one can modify or even read or insert messages. But that's not the problem here. The problem here is that someone is relaying perfectly authentic messages, and there is an implicit assumption about the proximity. And that implicit assumption can lead to problems, as we saw in the two previous scenarios. And distance bounding deals with this. And distance bounding has a few frauds. It has 4 frauds to be exact. And the first one I'll cover is mafia fraud. And this is essentially what we've seen so far. So it's captured by some verifier who presents a challenge to the prover. And the prover in this case has a colluder, forwards the challenge, and this colluder talks to a legitimate prover who gives the response, which is forwarded back and eventually forwarded to the guard, and the verifier here, the guard, will accept since it's a correct response, although the legitimate prover was not in proximity. So this is exactly what happened in the previous 2 scenarios. However, distance bounding goes a bit further. There is another type of fraud which must also be dealt with, which is terrorist fraud. And in this case, the difference is that we don't have a colluding party talking to an honest party. We're actually colluding with that not so honest party directly. For instance, if someone has a monthly pass for the public transport system, then if a friend wants to go by the public transport system, you could relay the responses for your ticket, and they could use that one, which of course isn't the idea of how it should work. But without distance bounding, it would work. And that's exactly this scenario, the terrorist fraud case. Another scenario is distance hijacking, where some entity, Alice in this case, wants to interfere at some chosen part of the protocol to make the verifier believe that this person is actually Alice and not who this person actually is. So for instance, this party initializes the protocol, and then Alice completes it, and the verifier here will believe that Alice is the one passing. The final case is distance fraud, in which case Alice doesn't have anyone to collaborate with, but she still wants to trick the verifier that she's close, although she isn't. Now, the main question we want to answer in distance bounding is, how does a device know that another device is actually present or in close proximity? So the idea comes from Brands and Schaum back in the 90s, where they had the idea that we could measure the round trip time to estimate the maximum distance. And in this way, we would also authenticate the distance attribute as well. So in addition to what we normally authenticate. So what we have done is that we provide a distance bounding zero knowledge proof of knowledge for discrete logarithms. And we do this by modifying the Schnorr identification scheme, because that one is used as a zero knowledge proof of knowledge in a variety of protocols that needs proofs of knowledge for discrete logarithms. And we provide the Schnorr identification scheme with distance fraud resistance, distance hijacking resistance, mafia fraud resistance, and terrorist fraud resistance. And we have two versions. First one is based on mutual trust. We'll get to that shortly, why. And the second one, which is the full desired version, is based on a PKI. So we can use a PKI for key management and certificates. Everything is proven in the DFKO model, which is one of the two formal models for proving things about proving distance bounding protocols. And we've also verified the protocol using Tamarin. So the neat thing about doing this for the Schnorr protocol is that we can use our distance bounding version of the Schnorr protocol as a drop-in replacement in other protocols. For instance, it's possible to have distance bounding direct anonymous attestation, which is the protocol part of the TPM standard. So you could make that one distance bounding. We could also have distance bounding privacy preserving attribute based credentials based on, for instance, CLO4 by Kaminish and Lisanskaya, and all the other protocols that are provided in that sort of framework. So we can basically make a lot of useful tools distance bounding using our scheme. So let's get to the first version, which is the one based on mutual trust. Now, the reason it's based on that it requires mutual trust is because we build on another piece of work by Singh, Liu, and Kapkun. And what they do is they solve the problem on the physical layer. And distance bounding protocols, they rely very much on the physical layer too, because there you can actually save quite a few nanoseconds, which is what you want to do to try to cheat on the distance. And the way you can do that is by interpreting these symbols before you've received the full symbol, and thus start relaying before you've received the entire message. So you can cheat a bit on that. However, what they do is that they cryptographically scramble these symbols, so to speak, and thus they make this attack unusable. So what they actually do is they protect against mafia fraud on the physical layer. And the interesting part, the most interesting part, is that they allow us to use several bits, so a bit string in these protocols. Traditionally, until this paper came out in 2019, you had to use 1-bit challenges and 1-bit responses in distance bounding protocol. That was a key limitation of what you could use to design your distance bounding protocol. Thanks to this paper, we no longer have this requirement. However, they do introduce a limitation, which is that you need to share a secret key. So these two black boxes need to share a symmetric key, which is a bit limiting. It works in the car theft problem in this scenario, because we can easily put the same shared secret key in the key fob and the car, same shared secret key in the car. That's easy. Then the car would just send a random challenge to the key fob, and the key fob could just modify one bit and reply, and then it would be properly authenticated, and you would have distance bounding properties as well. However, that doesn't work particularly well in the vehicle-to-vehicle kind of scenario, because if every car would have a black box, and every car and the black box in every car would have the same shared secret key, then all of these cars would share the same channel, which means that you can't use that secret key for identity anymore, so you can't use that one for authentication. So you need to run some type of authentication scheme on top of this channel. But it still provides mafia fraud resistance, because these black boxes will only present its owner with the complete message when it's fully received. So we still have that property, and this is the property that we will work with. We will work under this limitation in our mutual trust version of the protocol. So as mentioned previously, we build on the Schnorr protocol, we modify it. So this is the original Schnorr protocol, and the way it works is that we generate a random nonce, which we commit to. We send it to the verifier. The verifier generates a challenge, sends it to the prover. The prover computes the response and replies. Then the verifier will check if this is correct. And if it's correct, it will accept, otherwise reject. Now, there are two problems in this case. So computing the S, so the reply, after receiving the challenge is a problem. So we see here in the challenge response phase, when we do distance bounding, we do measure the time of flight, so the round trip time, from having sent a challenge to receiving the response. Now, if we also include the computation of the, if we include the computation in this round trip time, that affects precision pretty badly. So that's why we've used single bit challenges and responses traditionally in distance bounding. So that's one thing we need to address. The other thing is that we can't achieve terrorist fraud resistance in this case, because the colluder could simply compute the response for this malicious prover, and it would work. So we need to try to prevent that scenario too. We'll get back to that. So the modifications that we make in this protocol is that we have several challenges. So all the changes are highlighted. So we have several challenges, and we send all of them to the prover. The prover computes all the corresponding responses. And then in the distance bounding phase, the prover will say, okay, I'm ready, I've pre-computed all the responses. Then the verifier will pick one of the challenges to use, start measuring, start the clock, send the challenge. The prover now just fetch one of these pre-computed responses, which is just a memory access, which is on the order of magnitude that we are interested in, sends the reply, and the verifier will stop the clock and record how long it took. Now the verifier will accept if it's correct, and that the distance, the time it took, is within the given limit. So that's the small changes that we needed to make. And the reason we have several here is partly to have this construction. But to achieve terrorist fraud, the colluder would in this case need to know at least two of these responses. And we know, since this is the Schnorr protocol, that if you know at least two of these responses, you can compute the private key. And the way terrorist fraud resistance is constructed in distance bounding is by incentive. So if the colluder could compute the private key of the one helping, then the one helping has an incentive not to do it, because the colluder could impersonate this person forever, and not just this once. So if in the case of the public transport pass, the other person could just take your public transport pass and use it even when you want to use it, which is an incentive not to share it then. Now, let's proceed to the PKI version. So it would be much nicer if each car here has a unique key, because then we can do key revocation and things like that, which very much helps this case. The way we do this is that we do a Diffie-Hellman key exchange to establish the shared key. And then we need to anonymously authenticate the shared key. And we do this by signing the Diffie-Hellman key exponent with the private key. And then we prove knowledge of a signature on that private key by some certificate authority. So what we do is we want to run this proof of knowledge of discrete logarithms in a distance bounding fashion. So the original Schnorr protocol just has alpha and this one. We need to run prove knowledge of the Diffie-Hellman key exponent, the signature, the key that we use to sign it, and the signature on that key. And we prove that we actually do know the Diffie-Hellman key exponent, and we do know our signature on this exponent. And we also have a blinded signature on this private key. So this way we authenticate all these steps. And the way the protocol changes is that we now run several proofs of knowledge in sort of parallel. We do them at the same time. So instead of just one S here, one response, we compute responses for other protocols too. We still have the same challenges. And when we reply, so the verifier still picks one challenge. And when we reply, we actually send all the responses concatenated into one. And then the verifier stops the clock, extracts them, and does the verification. So as I said, this is the proof of knowledge that we do, and we do it in a distance bounding way. So we authenticate the Diffie-Hellman key exponent at the same time as we do the actual proof of knowledge that we wanted to do, along with the proof of knowledge that we do know a signature on this key. So we have the entire chain intact, and we show everything at the very same time, which we need to do to get the proximity to show that the knowledge that we prove knowledge of is actually within proximity. So the last question to ask us now is, how costly is this compared to non-distance bounding Schnorr protocol? Well, not that much more expensive actually. If we look at the mutual trust version, we see that the only difference in randomness needed is a factor m here. So we need a bit more randomness generated. We need a factor m more arithmetic operations to do. The exponentiations are the same. So the mutual trust version is not that much more expensive. The m factor here depends on how much security we want for the distance bounding. So the higher m, the less possibility of cheating. The PKI version is, of course, more expensive because we need to do 5 proofs in parallel at the same time. But that's expected. I mean, we do need to run the PKI verifications at the same time. So it's not that much more expensive, not more than expected for having a PKI. So we need to do more arithmetic operations. We, of course, need much more randomness. And we can see where the costs come from. So for instance, all the arithmetic operations come from the distance bounding phase here. Same for the exponentiations. We have a few pairing operations, and that's only due to using CLO4 for this. So that's the pairing operations we use, which is used in the blinding of the signature and the verification. But we could use another scheme for that too, as long as it's based on discrete logarithms. So we just picked CLO4 because that one has quite a lot of there are quite a lot of tools surrounding that one that can be used for distance bounding attribute-based credentials in that case. Now that's what have we said here? Well, the takeaway is that, yeah, we have a distance bounding version of the Schnorr identification scheme. And this one can be used as a drop-in replacement for the Schnorr protocol, used in other protocols for proofs of knowledge, and make those protocols distance bounding as well. And for instance, we could do distance bounding privacy preserving attribute-based credentials based on, for instance, CLO4. That was everything. Thanks a lot.